The idea of unschooling flies in the face of most educational approaches, and to most people it doesn't look like it could possibly work. How are children going to learn anything if they don't study or have any structure and we just let them do what they want? In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how and why unschooling works so that you can unschool both successfully and confidently. Hi, I'm Adam, brain-based dad. I'm an unschooling dad who was also unschooled 30 years ago when the school system failed me. Unschooling is really a misunderstood approach to home education, and even parents who unschool often feel like they're getting it wrong, especially when it comes to core subjects like reading and maths. Today I'm going to explain exactly what unschooling is and how it works, so that you understand why it's a better way of learning than almost anything else you might try. I'll show you how, and most importantly when, to approach core subjects like reading and maths, and give you the secret to unschooling them so that it becomes ridiculously simple and easy for you. I'll identify the two biggest pitfalls that unschooling parents fall into so that you can identify them and be successful as an unschooler. And we're also going to dispel some of the myths and misunderstandings that surround unschooling so that you're left clear and confident in your choice about whether unschooling's for you or not. And along the way, I'm also going to explain some of the brain-based reasons why unschooling actually promotes better quality learning than both school and homeschooling. If you get value from this, please give the video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you did that too. So what is unschooling? Well, unschooling is a term that was coined by the author and educator John Holt. He described unschooling as learning and education that does not resemble school learning and education. One of the reasons that I really like that definition, if it even is a definition, is because schools aren't actually designed for learning. Schools are designed for teaching. You know, the schools are organised so that teachers can teach effectively to a group of 20 or 30 kids at once. They're not designed for each student to be able to learn effectively in their own way and at their own pace. So the first thing to understand is that unschooling is really an approach to learning rather than to teaching. So to understand unschooling, what you really have to understand is learning and the process of learning. You know, in school, students don't have any say into what, when, how, or for how long they study. The teachers, school, school board, or the state decide what should be taught and when. So you could say that school is prescriptive about learning, whereas unschooling isn't prescriptive. Yeah, even homeschoolers often follow prescribed curricula, whereas unschoolers don't. Unschooling's a child-led approach to learning through real-life experience. So that could be through things like play or games or going shopping or cooking or doing household activities like DIY. It also includes social activities like spending time with friends. And it even might include some elective classes, some chosen subjects that the child chooses. That's really one of the myths of unschooling, that it can't include any lessons or any teaching. No, it can, it's just by choice. At the moment, my son goes to an art class and a pottery class and a forest school and adventure day where he does things like axe throwing and rock climbing because he chooses to. It was on offer in the area. We asked him if he was interested in doing it and he said yes, so we signed him up. But the classes that unschoolers might take are by choice. It's still child-led. Unschooled children both participate in our day-to-day life and we support them learning what they want to learn about. It's really what every parent does naturally when their children are really small. Yeah, unless parents just slap their kids in nursery when they're really small, they carry them around with them and the kids just observe and learn the whole time. You see, we're all born natural learners. It's really a myth that you have to inspire kids to learn or show them how interesting things are. No, kids are just interested. They're interested in everything. They see what's around them, they're like, what's this, what's this, what's this, what's this? They have questions, they experiment, they work it out for themselves. You know, our brains are wired to learn. From the moment that we're in the womb, we're already learning, starting with things like our mother's voice. And then once we're born, we start to learn how to do things like walk and talk. We just don't always do them at the same pace. You know, some will learn to walk at 9 months and others at twice their age at 18 months. We can't force them to learn any quicker. They'll learn at their own pace and they'll do it in their own way. They have to work it out and discover it for themselves. But once they do, it becomes part of them. They've really learned it. And that's really the case for all learning. You have to discover it for yourself. You know, someone can show you something and explain it to you over and over and over and over again. And it makes no difference until you get it for yourself. But once you get it for yourself, once you discover that 2 + 2 really does equal 4, then it makes sense. But you've got to get that in your own way and in your own time. No one can make you get it any sooner. Sure, we can support that process. We can guide that process. We can show you there's 2 over here and there's 2 over here and that makes 4. That might help you get it, but you have to get it for yourself. You have to discover that 2 and 2 really is 4. Until you do, there is no learning. And unschooling is about continuing that natural process of learning and discovering for yourself. You know, we don't often think of it this way, but learning is really the process of millions and millions of neurons in your brain forming new connections. And until our own brain forms those new neural connections through play and experience, through trial and error, through observation and interaction, no new learning happens. But unfortunately, society's decided that usually around the age of 5, kids should stop learning and discovering and exploring for themselves and instead should start to be taught. That there are things that they should know and there are things that they should start to study and practice, even if they're not interested in them. So we put them into school and we teach them separate and discrete subjects like English or maths or science or history, because otherwise they won't learn. And that's another myth, that kids won't learn unless they're taught. The problem is when we start telling kids what they should be learning and stop them from exploring the things that are naturally interesting to them, it has less importance to them. And this is really one of the most fundamental aspects of learning, is that something needs to be relevant and important or salient for the brain to form strong new neural connections. And if the brain doesn't form strong neural connections because something isn't salient, isn't relevant and important, then things get forgotten more easily. This is an idea that's been talked about for thousands of years. You know, Plato, the philosopher, said, "Knowledge that is acquired under compulsion obtains no hold on the mind." More recently, John Holt described the same issue. In his book, How Children Learn, he wrote, "The anxiety children feel at constantly being tested, their fear of failure, punishment and disgrace severely reduces their ability both to perceive and to remember, and drives them away from the material being studied into strategies for fooling teachers into thinking they know what they really don't know." One of the things that Holt noticed when he was working in the school system was that if children were given a test and then they were given the same test after just one weekend, they'd actually score lower the second time. What he realized was that they really hadn't learned anything about the subject at hand. They'd learned how to pass the test. They'd only retained enough information to get them through the test, to survive, but they hadn't really ingrained that information. So it had started to slip away after just a few days. And I'll bet that if we went back and tested them a while later, they would have forgotten even more. You know, I'm curious, how much of what you learned in school do you think you remember? Let me know in the comments below. But it gets worse with prescribed learning. When we tell children what to be interested in, or when or for how long, it can actually be detrimental. When you stop kids from exploring what's naturally interesting and important to them, and instead we start teaching them and telling them what they should be interested in and what they should be learning, we're also telling them that what they're interested in isn't important, and perhaps even that learning itself isn't enjoyable. And when that starts to happen, when learning itself becomes a chore, then kids stop wanting to learn entirely. And we see that in school all the time. It's not that the subjects aren't interesting. Science is fascinating. History, geography, art, it's all incredibly interesting and potentially enjoyable, especially for different people, but kids don't want to be there. They've been told what to do for so long, the process of learning has stopped being enjoyable for them. So when you start unschooling, especially if you've come from school, you want to take some time to get school out of your system. It's what's known as deschooling. And one of the pitfalls, that parents fall into is not deschooling themselves. Parents also need to go through a deschooling process and get school-like ideas of teaching and learning and what that looks like out of their system. And if you forget to do that, you're likely to be pulled back towards a school-like way of doing things. You know, I'll make a video about deschooling in the future. So if you want to make sure you get that, please make sure you subscribe. But in the meantime, just notice any time that you're pulled towards wanting to make teaching or learning look anything like school. So how do you actually unschool? Well, when you unschool your kids, it's child-led learning. So we let our children's interests guide and inform what we do and how we spend our time. Child-led doesn't mean that our kids are in charge or that they dictate what we do. You know, they're not in charge, but neither am I. You know, we work together to make things work for the whole family. And there are definitely times when I have to say something like, I know you want to keep painting, but we can't do that right now. You know, we have to go to the shops, otherwise we're not going to have anything for dinner. What child-led learning really means is that we help them explore the things that are of interest to them. and we support them in learning about it. So if, for instance, your kid is interested in bugs, it might mean that you go out into the wood and you go bug hunting. Maybe you go to the library and you get a book about bugs and you start to identify the bugs. Then you're reading. Maybe you draw the bugs that you find. Then you're doing art. Maybe you learn about where these bugs exist in the world and how they evolved. Now you're doing science and history and geography. That one interest can lead you anywhere. And it's our job as parents to support that and also to help them kind of unfold and unpack any one topic into all of the other topics potentially, and let them explore it as fully as they want to explore it and in the way that they want to explore it. Maybe they don't want to draw pictures of the bugs. Maybe they want to sit and read a book about bugs. Maybe they want to learn about where they exist in the world. But it's our job to help them explore that topic, but to do it in a way that works for them. And you never know where that one topic is going to lead you. It might spark an interest in another topic. But doing it in that way has much more relevance, has much more salience to real life. And what they learn is going to get retained much more strongly. This process of following an interest is really how I got interested in neurology in the brain. When I was unschooled, I got really interested in juggling. Juggling led me to circus school. From there, I studied more circus skills and eventually became a circus teacher and ran a circus school. And I wanted to become a better teacher, so I started learning about how the brain controls movement, and I started learning more and more about the brain. It was an unschooling process that actually unfolded over years, because when I was young, I wasn't interested in science at all. Now I practice studying and learning about the brain and neurology. Who'd have thought that that was going to happen when I was a teenager? It was never going to happen. But it often seems to people that this way of approaching learning is lazy. Oh, well, if you don't follow a curriculum and if you're not learning this and this and this and this, and you're just letting kids do whatever they want to do, oh, well, that's easy. Anyone can just let their kids do what they want to do, but they're not going to learn anything. I'd argue that it's the other way around. Following a curriculum and just doing what it says in a workbook is easy. Taking one topic and tying it to everything else and helping kids explore things in a way that works for them, that's individualized to them, that takes effort, especially if you want to tie it to everything else that they've already experienced or known, and you can draw those connections for them and help them to see things. That takes a lot more energy and effort. Unschooling is anything but lazy. Sure, you don't follow a curriculum. You don't have to force kids to sit down and learn. That's easier. They want to do it. That's easier, but it's anything but easy. The other misconception is that unschoolers don't do anything. That's kind of true. Unschoolers don't do any one thing. They do everything. They do everything, everywhere, all at once. Now, there are two other important pieces of this unschooling puzzle that you need to understand before I tell you the secret of how to unschool reading and maths. First, you need to understand why we all naturally want to learn. And for that, you need to understand why we have a brain. Although our brain does all of these amazing things, it lets us see and feel and connect with others and love and imagine and dream, it really only exists for one reason, and that's to ensure your survival. We have a brain in order to survive. That's its first and primary job. So we learn things that support our survival. We learn to move because being able to move and control our body helps us survive. We learn to talk because being able to communicate helps us get the things that we want or get the things that we need, and it helps us work together with other people, which helps us survive. So we learn in order to survive. But we have to survive in a certain environment. We have to survive where we are. So learning the things that are around us is important to us. That includes the trees and the plants and the bugs and the people, but it also includes the skills and the tools that help us survive, the skills and the tools of our community. Thousands of years ago, that might have been how to hunt and how to use a spear. These days, our kids want to use the tools and the skills that they see the adults around them using. So that includes things like your mobile phone and your computer. They see us using them and they want to use them. They want to learn it and they want to play with it and they want to mimic it. My daughter would pick up a rock and pretend to talk on the phone. That's how learning starts. Learning starts by mimicking using the skills and the tools that they see around them. So if you do carpentry, your kids are probably going to want to learn to use your saw. They're going to want to play with the saw. They're going to want to start to do it as they get older. The second thing that it's important to know is that we don't learn in a straight line. Learning ebbs and flows. If you look back through your life, there are probably periods in your life where you got really into something. You wanted to learn everything that you could about it. And then that desire ebbed and you stopped being so interested. And those periods of what seem like a lack of interest are actually really important for learning. The brain actually needs that downtime to start to integrate that information, to start to connect it to your existing body of knowledge. How does this fit with everything else that I know? And then you might find that there's another wave of learning. And that's the same for kids, that their learning will ebb and flow, both day to day. They might be really into something for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or half an hour, then they won't be interested in it anymore. But it also happens over longer periods of time, that they'll be interested in something for a couple of weeks and then they'll stop being interested. And both those periods when things ebb and flow are important for learning, and let the brain both gather more information and then assimilate and integrate that information. So let's start to look at how we apply all of this to learning things like reading and maths, or really any other subject. And then I'll share with you the unschooling secret that even most unschoolers don't know, that will make unschooling things like reading and maths ridiculously simple for you. First of all, unschooling is a child-led approach to learning through experience. So we want to take our children's lead on what and when they're interested in reading. We don't want to force them to read or make them read, because then that might put them off reading. Secondly, the brain is learning all the time. So recognize that your kids are already learning reading because they notice words and letters all around them, not just in books when they're practicing reading, but on street signs and on the sat nav in your car and when you're reading a recipe in the kitchen. So reading will naturally be seen as important, and they will naturally want to start to be able to read for themselves. And that's because what we naturally want to learn are the skills and tools for our survival. At some point, your children will start to be interested in them. It may just be curiosity, or it may be because reading becomes important to them or useful for something that they want to accomplish. Maybe that's because they want to read something that they're interested in, or maybe it's because they want to follow a recipe to make a cake for somebody that they care about and they want to do it on their own. But at some point, reading will become important for what they want to accomplish, and at that point, they'll be interested in doing it for themselves. Then remember, learning ebbs and flows, and both are important for learning. Some days they'll be really into reading and some days they won't. On the days when they're really into reading, it feels great, it feels like they're doing something, it feels like they're really accomplishing something. But remember that on the days when they're not interested, they're still processing that information and their brain is assimilating it and integrating it with everything else they know. On those days, it's important that we don't push it. We don't want to put them off reading by making them do it when their brain isn't in that space where they want to do it. And aside from the second pitfall that you might fall into, and the secret to making it ridiculously simple and easy, that's the whole deal. But what if they show no interest in learning to read? What if they get to 10 years old and they still can't read? Maybe then we should teach them. Maybe we need to inspire them to read. Please, whatever you do, don't try and inspire them to read. Inspiring them to read is usually code for convincing and cajoling and making them read. If you want to inspire them to read, they have to discover it for themselves. That's where learning really happens. They have to see that being able to read is important to them, and then and only then will they naturally be inspired to read. You have to trust that it'll happen, and eventually it will happen. Whether it happens at 4 or 7 or 11 years old, it won't make the slightest bit of difference, because by the time they're 18, they'll all be indistinguishable. And this is the second pitfall that parents fall into, is not trusting that it'll happen. Unschooling reading is really a game of trust and patience, and it's often really hard for parents, especially if you feel like your kids are behind. You start to stress and worry that unschooling isn't working. That's one of the reasons why I have a free Breathing for Patience program. I'll put a link in the description below so that you can get that. But as Pat Ferenga said, unschooling is giving children as much freedom to explore the world in their own way as you can bear. So here's the secret to unschooling reading or maths or any other subject like that. You have to wait until they're ready and then move fast. When their interest is flowing and they want to learn, you want to capitalize on that. You've got to strike while the iron is hot and do everything that you can to support their interest. Because when they're interested, they're going to learn, and they're going to learn fast. And it's going to be effortless for you because they're going to be pulling for it. They're going to want it. I know an unschooled girl who didn't read until she was about 12 or 13 years old, and then all of a sudden got interested and learned to read in a weekend. You know, forget about spending day after day and week after week and year after year learning to read. Wait until they're ready and then do it in a weekend. It will be ridiculously easy for you. But, and here's the really big but, you have to stay attentive to the natural ebb and flow of their interest. If you keep pushing them to learn to read when they're no longer interested at that moment, you're just going to be pressuring them into doing something that they don't want to do. And in my experience, that only ends up with both you and them being annoyed and frustrated. And if that sounds familiar, you're definitely going to want to check out my free breathing program I mentioned before to help you be more patient when things become frustrating and difficult with your kids. Because let's face it, as a home educator and an unschooler, you're going to be spending a lot of time with your kids. Let me know your thoughts and questions about unschooling in the comments below. If you've gotten value out of this, please give the video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you did that too.